Bob, you were a pioneer in non-surgical embryo transfer, kind of at the second generation of the Roxys. What caused you to persist in this endeavor without even holding a degree?
Well, I guess I'd have to give my dad a little credit. Way back in 1946, when I was 14 years old, we had a veterinary by the name of Dr. Garapé, and he was kind of the Dr. Wolfer of southern Quebec. He was the sterility expert in that area. And he had a son born the same day as I was. And one summer, the veterinarian, my dad, he was a Frenchman, and he had a son that same age as me, and they decided they swapped boys for the summer. His son could learn to speak English, and I learned to speak French. Well, it worked good for his son because my family didn't speak any French, but the veterinary was perfectly bilingual. So I rode with the veterinary the whole summer, lived with him and rode with him. And look, I come away that fall probably with a pretty damn good understanding on reproduction, because that's what we done every day all summer long. And he was a great guy to explain what he was doing and how he was doing it. Of course, it was in the days when we didn't have all the wonderful drugs. We got the day to work on reproduction, but palpating and things like that. So I was pretty well versed in reproduction in that fall. When you're 14, reproduction is pretty important. Okay, the next thing, I worked as an AI technician at NIPCO for 7 years as a technician, and then a few more years after that as promotion manager and personnel manager. After that, when I got fireman, when the embryo transfers first started, we had a couple of medical doctors from Chicago that done some embryo transfer locally. And one of the things, they were doing it surgically, the recovery and everything was surgical. They rolled the cow on their back under general anesthesia and cut a little hole right in front of the udder and exposed the uterus and flushed the embryos out that way. Unfortunately, we were doing Roxy's mother when she was 15, and she went into shock and we lost her while they were doing that. Well, these guys were unscrupulous sons of guns. They went out of business pretty quick. And the fellow that was working with them was Dr. Russ Mauer, who had a PhD in reproductive physiology. And Russ had worked on hormone research at Abbott Laboratories for quite a few years, and probably had as good an understanding of productive hormones as anybody I've ever talked with. And he was kind of lost at the moment because they went out of business, and he was, Abbott had closed up their large animal research section. So Russ and I were talking one time, and I said, you know, we ought to get together and see what we could do with embryo transfer. And so we decided we needed a veterinary in the group, so we had access to buy drugs. I talked to my local veterinarian, Dr. Ostrander, and he said he was willing to be a partner, but he wouldn't be an active partner because he said his business was so busy he didn't have time. But we could use his veterinary license to buy drugs. And so that's basically what Dr. Ostrander amounted to in our organization. He didn't help us, didn't do much at all, but we bought drugs through his license. And Dr. Mauer had a really good understanding of embryos. He had worked at Washington State University doing embryo work on sheep and rabbits. And really all they done there was research, and mostly they just killed them to flush the embryos up. So he really didn't know anything about flushing, or he was not a very knowledgeable cowman. But he did know the embryo business inside out. We got together, and with my ability with cows and reproductive work and his knowledge of the embryo business, we made a team that worked, and we flushed a lot of cows for quite a few years there. And so I guess I owe whatever little bit I know about embryo work to Dr. Garapé when I was 14, and Dr. Mauer when I got in the embryo business.
But somebody in this room said through all this work in embryo transfer, what became the National Association for Embryo Transfer, they always have a little line that says what degree you have. And I write a lot of acronyms and bust them in words and sign them out, but I never saw the one D-O-P-E, dope. You want to talk about that?
Well, I was a charter member of the International Embryo Transfer Company, and then within the next few years, it got taken over pretty much by veterinarians who were in the embryo business. And they changed the rules. To be a member of the International Embryo Transfer Company, you had to have a degree. And obviously I just finished high school, about as far as I ever got in life. So anyway, when I signed my name the next year, I put DOPE after it, expecting somebody to ask me what that was. You know, we went 5 years before somebody asked me. That's simple, that's a doctor of personal experience. So I was a member of for 5 years as a doctor of personal experience. They decided after that they wouldn't kick me out there.
You can thank your friend just immediately north of the border for that question. He's on the Holstein board. I can figure out who that was, but I thought it was pretty cute and appreciated that. As I alluded to earlier, Frank and Bob are the immediate past elite breeder winners of Holstein Association USA. Question for Frank: your farm is among the most respected tour stops by international visitors. I read that in all the letters, any of the support of your nominations in the past. In addition to the genetic related questions that come from those tour stops, our genetics are sought out worldwide in the U.S., especially from your farm. But it takes another part. What are some of the most common management or on-farm husbandry questions by the international guests?
Well, I guess, you know, of course, they always ask how many cows and this and that, but I think one of the things they've asked is if we use genetically modified seed, you know, and I guess that's a normal over in Europe, but that's a big question. Or always seem to be, they like to know how many acres of land you farm, what bulls you're using, or I guess that's probably the biggest questions.
In the discussions on the genetically modified organisms, so in Europe, there's one BT corn variety approved, and there's one strain of potato. And right now, in the European Commission, there's one more BT corn coming through. What is their take on it? Obviously, they're not been very embracing of GMOs, and in Iowa, there's a heck of a lot of corn growing there, just to say the least, and soybeans.
Well, I think they look at our corn if they come there during you know, the season, and they see this good corn, and I think they like it from what the people I've talked to. So it's just whether they can. And,
more of the politically correct.
Right.
Okay. Farmer cows.
They don't have that opportunity to raise that kind of corn because they, you know, the seeds are so improved.
Some of us in the room were at the National Genetics Conference earlier this week in Phoenix, Arizona. One of the buzzwords was body size. There's really two components of that: stature and strength or width. Let's talk about those two issues. How has body size impacted your herd and your overall operation over the years? And consider facilities and cash flow, profitability, all those things. Frank, you want to take that first?
Well, I think for us, if you're running a freestall barn, you're going to have these cows that are stronger, I think, and have some width to them because if they're in heat running around in there, our experience with them is the weaker, narrow cows, they always go down. So I guess that's been one experience. And another thing, I think these cows that don't have that strength when they're calving, and especially the last 2 months, they just have a hard time getting going. It seems like pneumonia bothers them and everything else. So I think this dairy strength is really important in our breed and width.
I guess I'll talk about what I think size should be in the industry rather than in my herd. We have facilities that are kind of designed for big cows, and we get along just fine with big cows. But I think extra large cows, extra tall cows, just don't do well in most facilities today, simply because the facility's too small for them. They lay uncomfortably, they're in the milking powder cramped, and this causes stress and injury and discomfort, which makes them not perform real well. So probably we can't change all the facilities, so probably the right thing is uniformity. And I think maybe Holstein Association has hit the nail right on the head when they discriminate for cows that are too tall and cows that are too short. And so I think uniformity fits a uniform facility, and maybe that's the kind of cow we should breed. One of the things that we hear a lot of criticism on is the shows. That the shows are selecting cows that are too big. And I think in defense of the judges, that's not quite an accurate statement. When we go out there, get in the middle of the ring and have to make placings and give reasonable reasons for why we've done that. First thing I look at, and I think most judges, we want to make sure the cows are mobile. Can they all walk? And big cows and little cows can all do that. But the next thing is dairy character, or dairy strength, as we want to call it today. And I interpret that dairy character as the looks of a cow that she will milk. You want a cow that looks like she's going to produce high, and you want a cow that's strong enough to sustain that. And maybe the second part of that is the most important, enough strength to sustain it. So that involves quite a lot of different things. Number one, we give credit to a white front end, we give credit to a white rear end, a white rear udder, capacious barrel, we want, and that's a long barrel, a white barrel, and a deep barrel. We give credit to a long sweeping rib, that's a deep cow. We want an upstanding cow that carries her udder up off the ground out of harm's way. Now, having said all that, what kind of a cow has all those things? A big, tall cow. So we didn't place that cow first because she was big. We placed her first because she was deeper. She had a whiter rear udder. She was whiter in the front end. And it puts the judge in a tough spot when you're in the middle of the ring. I don't want to be the first judge to have to get in the ring and say, this cow I'm putting in second today has got the best udder in the class. She's deeper and whiter in the front end. She's a very angular ribbed cow, but she's just too damn tall, so she has to be second. I don't want to be the judge that has to say that, but I'm afraid that if getting too big is a big problem, then a show should go along with what the breed wants. And if we really think that's a problem, then maybe we need to put something in the shows a little bit similar to what Holstein does. If they're too big, they're too big. And I don't know how else you cure it, because when you're in the middle of the ring, those bigger cows have all the things that you want, and you don't put them up there because they're bigger. You put them up there because they're wider and deeper and longer and all those things.
So we're going to have a little fun here. We're going to do two winding the clock back. First one, Bob and Frank, we're winding the clock back. You're going to be 25 years old when you start this question, but you're going to have all the knowledge you have today. Pretty neat spot. How would you go about building a new Holstein herd from scratch?
I think if I didn't have a lot of money, I'd try to go on out and buy that cow with a good pedigree and with enough genomics that you can afford to do in vitro and maybe use the rest of the herd for recipients, to kind of. But I think the first thing you got to start with a good product. That cow isn't a transmitter or got a pedigree that tells you there's good bulls in the pedigree. I think it's really hard to start a new family that's really good. That's been my experience.
Well, I think like Frank, there's two things that you got to do to stay alive today. If you're going to breed good cattle, you've got to start with good foundation. And today, if you're going to market successfully, you better be kind of on the front line of genomics. So I think if I were going to start a new herd, I would look over the top end genomics in the breed, and I'd try to sort through them and see which ones of them come from the best performance cow families, the ones that can milk a lot of records and make good records and stay in the herd for a while. And I guess that would be my suggestion if I was going to start again, is start with the top genomics and try to find the best cow families you can find among the top genomics.